Welcome to the Ironcenturion Podcast, a Christ-centered adventure into leadership, manliness, and brotherhood. Today, we've got something a little bit different for you guys. We are wandering into the avenue of current events, and we're going to be talking about what's going on in Ukraine. And your first question might be, well, why are we talking about these things? That's not what you guys have done in the past. And we really felt like those three things that we talk about, adventure, those three things we talk about, leadership, manliness, and brotherhood, are very much embodied into this next topic. Michael, do you want to kind of let our listeners know what we're going to be going into today?
Yes. So I was thinking the best way to envision this is, Tim, have you seen any of those photos? You probably have. They're all over the internet, right? Of the differences between the president of Ukraine and how he's hanging out with his men, and Putin, the president of Russia, with his advisors or generals.
Yeah, they're a little bit different than each other, huh?
Yeah, they are. I think the one I've seen several, because it seems like they've got a pretty good social media campaign going on coming from Ukraine. But the one that really stood out to me is the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, is at the end of this like insanely long conference table all by himself, and clustered down at the other end are like 5 or 6 people. And nobody is in the seats in between. And he's just got this huge gap. I've heard rumor it's because he's afraid of COVID and other things that could happen to him now. But he just clearly has this huge separation from his people. And then there's one of the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and he's wearing a bulletproof jacket. He's surrounded by men that are armed, that are military guys, or maybe they're just civilians that have taken up arms. I'm not sure. And there's like a plate of food, and they're all just kind of huddled into this corner, kind of eating together. You've seen that one, right?
Yeah, I mean, stark contrast.
Yeah, and that's actually what gave us the idea, kind of, for this whole conversation and episode, is just wow, how obviously portrayed differently these men are, and their leadership styles are just so different and on display for the world to see right now. And it seemed like a great thing to talk about is what can we learn from a leadership perspective about how leadership can be done or should be done.
Yep. And, tag on their manliness and brotherhood while we're at it too, because I think those three things are very much intertwined as we look at the leader that Zelensky is in this situation. Now, I will say there's some caveats with this episode, right? This is not something that we are well versed in. We definitely spend a lot of time as a staff talking about these things. So this was kind of we wanted to paint a picture of what kind of conversations we're having, the things that we are noticing about current events.
Yeah, when you say well-versed, you mean the Eastern European political scene is not something I've been following in great detail until now, as I imagine most of the world hasn't been.
Right. So this is not necessarily an endorsement of either of these leaders by any means. Not only that, but like when this episode comes out, today is March 8th. When this episode comes out could be later than that. It will be later than that. And things can and probably will change drastically between now and then. So know that we are doing our best at the current time of recording with the information that we have to kind of put together a comparison, but things can change in the next week.
Yeah. And not only can they change, but I think the fog of war is a big deal, right? I mean, we're remote, we're getting information from news media outlets and social media, and the fog of war is big. They say that truth is one of the first casualties of war. We think we know what we know, and maybe even some of the stuff we know or think we know isn't even true, but we're going to take what we're seeing, and whether we're actually comparing fully their leaderships against each other or just the appearance of what their leadership is, I think there's a lot of lessons still to be gathered here.
Absolutely. So Michael, you actually have some strong ties to this region.
Yeah, I don't study all the politics necessarily, but I did spend some time in Russia many years ago. I have friends there still. And so I care about the people there, and I care about that part of the world. But I'm not alone in that, right? So I went to Russia, but you've been to Ukraine, right?
Yeah. So actually, the areas that are currently under some pretty heavy conflict. So I was in Kyiv, and I was also in Lugansk, which when I was there, those two names were not on the world stage at all. There was no fighting happening when I was there about 13 years ago now. But yeah, those were very, very, I'd never been to that part of the world before. And that was a real eye opener for me to see what life was like in Ukraine at that time. But the people there that we were there doing ministry with were very warm and welcoming, and just have a lot of respect for the Ukrainian people from that time forward. And obviously even more so now with the way that we've seen their bravery and heroism in the last couple of weeks.
And I feel the same about the Russian people that I have met and befriended, is that they are extremely warm and kind and caring people. I know that at least their country appears to be, the villain in this scenario, but the people that I knew are very warm and kind. And some of them have even issued significant public statements against this at great risk to themselves.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see that? I heard just recently that the police in Russia were stopping people on the street and requiring them to unlock their phones so that the police can scan through their messages to see if there's anything that
anti-war.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You want to talk about just trampling on people's freedoms.
Right. I mean, that to us as, we are Americans, both living here in America and, both of us living in Texas, that is a very far distance from the freedoms that we have here, but it is happening rampantly right now in Russia. And there's other parts of the world too that live under a tyrannical dictatorship like Russia is becoming.
Well, let's jump into this. Michael, do you want to kind of give us a highlights view of the two different leaders and kind of their rise to power and where we are today? And I'm just talking high level here. So,
sure. I'm sure that there are historians, there are media experts, there are analysts who would tell this in much more detail. But the basic histories, right?
If you've been living in a hole for the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, probably by now a lot of their history is known, but just to catch you up. So Vladimir Putin was elected as president of Russia many years ago. And so you go, well, that's interesting.
1999.
Why is he still president? He is still president because he has slowly consolidated power. And he spent a time not being president, but the guy that he put in place, and I mean that seriously, was clearly very much of a puppet. And eventually the puppet was removed and Putin returned to the presidency, and he's kind of made it a permanent thing. And so there's been an erosion of freedoms or erosion of democracy as he has consolidated power to build more of a czar, king, dictator type role. And so he's been the guy in charge of Russia for over 20 years now, either directly or kind of behind the scenes.
Yep.
Zelensky's different, and in like a very strange way different. Zelensky was a public figure in the form of he was a sketch comedian. He was an actor. He was on the stage. He did. I've heard him kind of described as he was the Ukrainian version of a Jon Stewart or an SNL cast member. And he did a lot of comedy stuff. I mean, if you watch the kids movie Paddington Bear, in the Ukraine, he's the voice actor for Paddington Bear. And then he had this TV show, and the TV show was him being the president of Ukraine, and it became extremely popular there. They loved the show. And so kind of after the show, he actually runs for president, and he won the vote. He got 73% of the vote to elect him president, which
just to, even put a little bit more social context in this, the Ukrainian presidency is heavily influenced by the Kremlin, right? So you have a lot of heavy-handedness in Ukrainian politics that's happening to sway what's going on in Ukraine. And the same happens in Russia, right? So
what are you talking about? Russia doesn't meddle in foreign elections?
Not at all. Especially, Putin has how many, when he was elected, quote unquote, last, how many people were jailed, for being political opponents during that election cycle. It's just dirty politics to a level that we are not even close to familiar with in the United States. So yeah, I mean, so to have this guy come out of nowhere really to win the populist vote is quite the impressive act. And at the time, Russia's probably thinking, well, this guy isn't a threat because he's a comedian, right? So he's clearly not there to gain power. He's a sideshow, and we'll just call this a glitch. And next time, we'll go ahead and put our person back in.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a guy who had a really good grasp of performance, stage mannerisms, social media. He was just a man of the people in a popular sort of way, like a YouTube star might be, or an SNL cast member. Yeah, I mean, that's who he was, and so I can easily see why Russia would just kind of dismiss him.
And we're about 2 weeks into the war right now, and I think Putin has realized the error of his thinking, in that he was a character that could be dismissed. He's proven himself to be a tremendous adversary in this battle. So, Michael, we talk at length. It's our different training events. There's a Greek poet, and I'm going to butcher this name. Archilochus. He probably is related to a dinosaur. But he wrote, we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. And that's something we talk about pretty frequently at our events, right, Michael? What are some common places that we talk about that?
Well, we talk about it when we're doing survival training or any of our tactical training that we do. We're just talking about this idea that you think in your head that if push came to shove, you could survive in the wild, or you could be Jason Bourne, or you could stitch up a wound if you had to, or all these list of things. You're like, that we all as men, I think, in our hearts go, yeah, if I had to do that, I could do it. Well, unfortunately, the answer is, if you haven't practiced it, if you haven't trained it, if you haven't done it, then under pressure, you're going to be a less good version of yourself, not an aspirationally good version of yourself. And that is generally true. So if you haven't practiced or trained for something, you're not going to rise under pressure. You're going to shrink under pressure.
So I was thinking about this and wondering how this applies to Zelensky, right? Because obviously you've never had the opportunity to train for your country being invaded, you being president. I mean, all these things, these are all on the job, decisions that are being made in real time. But really what I was thinking is, in this situation, he's rising to the level of his character. So in this time, he's had a lifetime of working on something, and that is his character. And I think what we're seeing portrayed on a world stage is the strength of that character at this time. And that's just a really inspirational thing to see. This guy's 44, so he's not very old. A lot of our listeners fall in that age bracket. So if you can imagine yourself as a 44-year-old sitting in his shoes, I mean, that's a pretty extremely heavy burden to bear at the moment. And this guy is just proving left and right that he has the character to bear that mantle.
Yeah, Tim, and even you and I, we were talking about this off mic and before in our signal thread, but the idea that I was a little skeptical that some of the stuff we first saw coming out from Zelensky was maybe all real and really him, because he knows social media so well, and I'm sure he has a PR team and even a propaganda team surrounding him, which is okay, right? There's some good value of sending out clear messages and consistent messages. So I wondered if some of this stuff was really posed up or not. And you remember me saying that. But the more and more I see hitting social media, the more and more it seems to be authentically him. Some of the stuff that's ironically his sense of humor or his pithy one-liners that are catching people's attention seems to be him.
Yeah, I really think you just see the depth of this guy's character in a lot of what he's portraying on social media, to the press on the world stage. Like, it's heavy. It's absolutely heavy, but it's, like you said, I think it's authentic, and this isn't an acting job that we're seeing. I think this is actually, the true Zelensky.
Yeah, he's built a lot of poise over years of time on stage and in front of cameras, and that gives him the ability to be quick-witted on some of these things. But like the line that he's been pretty famous for so far, when offers were made to him to help him evacuate, because lots of presidents of other countries during times like this have evacuated, or gone into hiding, or been found in holes in the ground. He instead, when given that offer, right, he said, "I don't need a ride, I need ammo." That's cool.
I mean, last night, our time, he shot a video of himself showing exactly where he was, his exact location, saying, "Hey, I'm still here in Kyiv. I'm not planning on leaving, and I'm not afraid."
Yeah, I've seen one of those videos from him almost I've seen multiple ones a week, 2 to 3 a week, of him saying, "Hey, I just want everybody to know I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere."
Yeah.
And as he's been claiming too, that his family is still in the country and that they haven't fled either.
Yeah, that's showing a tremendous amount of solidarity with the people that you're leaving, even though, just because of the opportunities afforded to him as a world leader, would give him the option to do otherwise, right? But he's choosing solidarity with his people at great risk to both his own personal safety and the safety of his family, which, again, I think just speaks to that character.
Yeah, it's a really amazing thing to see. It's inspiring. And I think his conviction is inspiring his people, but it's also inspiring other people. There's a foreign legion helping fight for Ukraine that is gaining steam from people from all over the world who are coming to volunteer in some capacity. And I think that's one of the things that is because of his conviction and his clear care for his country and his people that is building that steam.
Yep.
So let's put some specifics. What are some leadership principles that we should really be looking at and contrasting or comparing that you see?
Well, I think, one of the ones that goes back to my time in the military is just, especially as a platoon leader, that time when you're fresh out of officer training and you get your first platoon, there's very much the sense that the non-commissioned officers really tried to put into us before we got to that place, and that was spend time with your men, be in the trenches with them, do the things that they're doing, understand that you have a different role. Like your role is not to help them dig every inch of that foxhole, because you have other responsibilities. But if you show your face and put the shovel in the dirt a few times, that's going to go a long way for your credibility, versus if you're a distant and distracted leader that's just in the office doing the paperwork. You go in when the weather gets cold, which is, I think, a great compare and contrast of what we see in Putin and what we see in Zelensky right now, because obviously Putin is the one that is sending conscripts into battle who claim, most likely, I mean, genuinely, because of, I think, the number of people who are claiming this story, right, that they were just there to do military training in Belarus. Their phones were taken, and the next thing they know, they've crossed into Ukraine. Many of them saying that they didn't even realize they'd crossed an international border until they were getting shot at. So versus Zelensky, who has spent time in the trenches, you see him regularly in, a plate carrier and helmet right on the front lines with his men and women, because the Ukrainian women are not to be left out of this defensive strategy, because they're fierce. But yeah, it's just that principle of be with the people who you're leading in real and tangible ways.
And he has been. I think one of the leadership principles that stands out to me is one of my mentors talked to me about a difference between essentially a good leader and a bad leader. And a good leader recognizes that they have responsibilities, that a leadership is a responsibility heavy role, and a bad leader claims their rights as leaders. And so what this means is that a good leader is recognizing that they have responsibilities to their people, responsibilities to those that are following them, responsibilities to others that are within those spheres of influence or those spheres of impact. And so they are trying to make things better for them. A bad leader is claiming their own rights. I'm the leader, so I should get this. I need the best seat at the table. I need the best food. I need the best care. I'm the leader. Give me all of the best things. And they're claiming things that are rights, which they may have a legitimate claim to. But the fact that they're so desperately clinging to them is not a good thing. And we see that in both of these guys, right? I truly see a deep level of responsibility right now in Zelensky. He hasn't left the country. He has stayed with his people. He is continuing to actively fight for Ukraine, both physically, but also on the world politics stage, right? And he is inspiring other people to do the same thing. So have you seen any of the videos? Have you seen any of the videos of the UN meetings where there's the Ukrainian ambassador speaking? Have you gotten to see any of those, Tim?
Not of him speaking, no.
He is savage and amazingly diplomatic, but insulting to specifically the Russian ambassador, and it is fantastic. But he's basically following in many of the footsteps of Zelensky, and so it's just great to watch. And then on the other hand, we see Putin, who's claiming and grasping rights for himself, but also under the guise of for the people, right? He's said things like the USSR shouldn't have been broken up, and Ukraine is really ours, or at least this part is really ours. We have a right to this, so we're going to take it. And that contrast of responsibilities versus rights has always stuck with me pretty heavily as what it means to be a good leader.
Well, I think if we look back into the Bible, right? We look at the story of David, and most notably the story of him and Bathsheba, where he's abdicated his responsibility to be with his army in a time of war, right? We all know what happens when we as men abdicate our responsibility. I taught my soldiers going through officer candidate school. You can always delegate authority, but you cannot delegate responsibility. So there's a very distinct difference between those two things, right? Like I can say on my behalf, I want you to go and do this. But whatever that soldier does in response to my command and my delegation of authority, I am still ultimately responsible for those things. And you see Putin here is really, when you go down that path of choosing rights over responsibilities, you're going away from responsibility and choosing something that is self-serving and self-seeking. And it can be absolutely destructive, both as an individual on a personal level, but then the ramifications of what that means to the people you're leading is equally as destructive, if not more so.
Yeah, and speaking of destructive, when you're a leader with significant influence, both Zelensky and Putin have far more influence than you or I have, probably you or I will ever have. They've got they've got a lot of influence right now. But you can see that influence has consequences. Actions have consequences. Putin, some guy we've never met, many Americans have never really even cared about, has made decisions for the other side of the world that has caused strife on the other side of the world. And yet that's having ripple effects that are affecting people all over the globe. We're seeing gas prices increases. Companies are making sanctions or statements. There are people going to help or being forced out of their homes, all because of decisions in some boardroom really far away. And I think that there's a lesson here to be learned too about leadership, which is it has echoing on consequences. I mean, it should have consequences. That's why you're the leader, to make decisions. Those decisions are going to have impacts. People know that. But to never forget the responsibility that those decisions you have make. You can literally change the life of someone who isn't even one of your direct followers, right? So Putin's decision is affecting people far outside his actual legal, territory of responsibility or territory of where he can, influence jurisdiction, right?
Yeah.
I think that's true in our lives too, on a much, much smaller scale, and probably on one we'll never know because the news isn't ever going to cover the impacts of the small decisions that we make. But when we make a decision for our lives, for the people following us, for our families, that also has impacts on the people around us that aren't under our jurisdiction or our direct influence, right? When I make a decision, that can impact other people. When you make a decision for your family and when your kids can play outside and not, that impacts the neighbor's kids and when they can get to play with your kids and not. And that influence is directly connected. And I think that's one of the things to keep in mind, is that our influence has waves far beyond what we'll ever know, ever see, or ever really fully understand. And so we should make those choices wisely.
Yeah. And those impacts can be good too. Like I think if we're strategic and careful in planning, like we're not talking only about negative impacts.
Oh,
like,
no. Thanks for, this exactly. You can build others up, and you can build others up that you never, ever know.
Well, Michael, you talk about having influence and positive influence on people you may never meet. And I know one of the questions that we've been wrestling with as a staff since this all kicked off are, what are ways that we can be meaningfully invested in this situation from home? Obviously, it seems like they're an entire world away from what we're capable of influencing. We definitely have a heart for helping those that are in need. The ways that we've responded in the past to hurricane relief, for example. But what can we do on a practical level to help ease the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Christ in Ukraine, and even those who don't know the Lord that are in Ukraine right now and suffering?
Yeah, I think there's some big ways and some small ways. And when I say small, I say that knowing that we just talked about how these waves of your decisions, your influence, can impact others. And so there's really not necessarily small ways, right? Those can have rippling effects. So let me start with a very obvious one that I think is maybe small, but I think attitude is very important. I think leaders have the right attitude in how they approach things. Because of the sanctions that are being placed on Russia, which is somebody who watches the markets and the economies and is interested in those things professionally, it has been shocking to me to see the scale and the speed at which many of these sanctions have been deployed. I suspect it surprised Putin too, which makes me a little bit happy. Specifically, I'm happy about the ones that are the personal digs, actually. So side note, I'm really a fan of the fact that he's lost a lot of his personal accolades. They stripped his black belt from him. Which is and he was the honorary president of the International Judo Association, and they took that away from him too. And I hope that bothers him a whole lot. But there's been some big waves and these sanctions. And one of the things it's going to do, it's already doing it, right, is we're going to see a significant spike in gas prices around the world. Gas for everybody at the pump just got way more expensive. And I'd like to frame briefly how I would encourage people to think about that. There's certainly plenty of room to complain about it. I filled up yesterday and it hurt. But in part, it's allowing these sanctions to happen on Russia because Russia is one of the top oil producers and natural gas and gasoline producers in the world. They're number 2, number 3 every year. And so by saying, most of the world's saying, we're not going to buy your oil anymore, it's shut down supply for the world drastically. So the price is going to go through the roof. I'm not saying paying for gas is always a good thing or always helping others, but right now in this moment, have the attitude that it's allowing us to put sanctions on Russia that are meaningful. And you can complain about all the other stuff if you want to, but I think that's a way we can help.
Yeah. And there's also some ministries that we've partnered with, Samaritan's Purse being one of them that we've partnered with in hurricane disaster areas, that they're there. They are providing medical care inside of Ukraine right now. And, obviously with Samaritan's Purse, they're sharing the gospel with those people as well. So not only are they having their physical needs taken care of, they're having their spiritual needs taken care of. So if you would like to donate to an organization that is already having an impact, already has boots on the ground, Samaritan's Purse, we'll link that in the description below if you'd like to share your support with them as well.
Yeah, and so they need help in a couple of ways. They've said, I don't know if they still do, but they had said at one point they need volunteers. They're looking for trained medical staff. I think the way that most people can help is by donating. And my opinion is, and based on what I've studied so far on this, is the best way to donate is to donate money. If you're called to donate and be involved, donate money that can go to an organization that has boots on the ground that can then buy exactly what they need when they need it, and don't try to guess and stuff like that. So Samaritan's Purse they sent a plane earlier this week, and they've created a field hospital where they're working to treat people who are injured in this process.
If that was some content you guys liked, we're kind of venturing into an area of current events that we've never gone into before. If you like that, shoot us a comment. If you didn't like it, do the same thing. Let us know, hey, wasn't a huge fan of that, and we'd be happy to have your feedback either way. But we just really felt like, as we look at leadership, manliness, and brotherhood, I mean, you really see Zelensky portraying all these aspects so well. I mean, in the leadership aspect, which we've covered so well, or not that we've covered so well, that he's demonstrated so well. Manliness, I mean, I even think here, like Putin's example of riding, bare-chested horseback through the rivers of Russia, right? The epitome of Russian manliness there, right? But at the same time, you have Zelensky, who is a small in stature man, right? He's not a huge, buff, ripped guy like Putin likes to show off that he is. But yet this deep manliness, this deep sense of character, I think, is something that we should strive to have in our own lives. And just the brotherhood, his sense of willingness to stand with the people who are actively taking part in the defense of their country, the patriots of Ukraine. I really, really appreciate the way he demonstrates all three of those aspects. So all that to say, thanks for joining us today on the Ironcenturion Podcast, a Christ-centered look at leadership, manliness, and brotherhood. We'll see you next time.
See you, Tim.